Hello, Debbie. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Oh, I am fabulous, Tiago. It's nice to be here with you.
Thank you so much for accepting our invitation to be a guest in another episode of Lessons from a Podcaster. Let's start with the pitch challenge. So, you are at a party or in the elevator and you meet someone that asks you about your podcast. You have 30 seconds to answer. What would you say?
Okay, well, if you're someone who feels like you're not getting everything you want out of life, you're low in energy, you're not sure where you want to go, you feel stuck sometimes, and Dream Power Radio is the place for you. It's a weekly podcast that features experts in all areas of empowerment, and we talk about practical, workable ideas to help you find your purpose, your passion, your confidence, your energy, so that you can live a life you love. And every once in a while, I do my own solo episode where I offer my own uh, very solid practical advice on how you can live your dream life.
Amazing. So, it's both solo episodes and mostly interviews. How do you find your guests? Like, how do you find interesting guests that you want to interview?
Okay, well, when I first started, I just started with people I knew because I knew some very interesting people in what I call the mind, body, spirit movement. But
Hmm.
of course, I ran out. but I started to attract some people who were interested in me. I found a promotional service that had very interesting guests that they offered me.
Okay.
And about 2 years ago, I found this service called Podmatch, which matches guests with uh, podcasters, and I found some
Interesting.
very, very, very interesting people through that. And every place, yeah, keeping my eyes open. One day I was listening to the radio and I heard somebody talking. It was an animal communicator, and I thought this might be an interesting guest. I sought her out and I got her. We had a great podcast. And, and
That
then
looks very interesting. Yeah, very interesting episode. And how does this tool Podmatch work? Like, so you write down what you're looking for, and do you always get relevant candidates, or is there a lot of also kind of not so interesting candidates?
Well, it's kind of interesting. When you sign up for the service, you post your profile, what you're looking for, what your podcast's about, what you're looking for, the kind of guests,
Hmm.
basically what you want. And there's search words, that match up to
Hmm.
uh, what you're looking for, and people will respond, or you can go in the search bar and put in, a search word for what you're
Okay.
looking for, and it'll spat out guests for maybe a good year, solid year and a half. I don't use the search bar because people find me,
Wow.
and I'm at the moment booked up, 4 months in advance from now. It's not all them; it's other places as well.
Hmm.
I think now they account for maybe about half the guests I get, and they're wonderful people
Okay.
because they're also people who sign up to the service on the guest side because they want to be guests,
Right.
and amazing people I have met through there, and it's been
I'm always
wonderful.
afraid in these tools that these people normally want to sell something, and they always, kind of showing off whatever their tools or their services. Is that something that you notice that this happens?
Well, if they have a service that's unique, I don't mind sharing it because, like I
Right.
said, my show is all about empowering my listeners to live a life
Hmm.
they love. And if somebody has an idea that can make life better, I don't mind sharing that at all. It's not
Okay.
about selling the service; it's about offering advice that people can use
Hmm.
they can use to make their lives better. And that's
Right.
what my mission is.
Yeah, it's a very interesting approach as well because, and you're absolutely right. If there's something unique, something interesting to share, why not, giving them some space to do so? So it makes a little sense. Why did you started this this podcast? You told me that you started already 5 years ago. How time flies! But like, do you remember the day like where you did your first episode and the reason behind it?
Well, I'll tell you what got me started. Uh, I was in a networking group, and there was a woman in my networking group who had a internet radio station, and she'd been after me for a while. She says, you're a dream life coach. You have a great service. You have wonderful advice. You want to be doing a show." And I kept saying, "No, no, no, I can't do this. I can't do this.
Mhm.
Then I realized that, one of the things that I help my clients with is to help them overcome their self-limiting beliefs. And here I was, I had this self-limiting belief that I couldn't do it. And I said, no, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
If anybody else can do it, why can't I do it? So she also had some advice on, how to start a podcast. And
Mhm.
so I signed up with her network. About 2 or 3 months after we started, she went from internet radio to podcasts. So it, you know, the platform was different, but the message was the same.
Right.
Uh,
Mhm.
but yeah, I went kicking and screaming. But then once I got in it, I love it. And sometimes I call it my therapy because I
Yeah,
learn so much. I get so
definitely.
much so much more information than I would have
Yeah.
gotten anywhere else. And it's helped me. And I figure if it's helping me, it's got to be helping people in
Mhm.
my audience as well. So there you
Yeah,
go.
totally. I totally understand that. I think podcasting is very therapeutical because it's also a way for us to speak with others and learn from others, but as well, especially in the solo episodes, we get to speak about ourselves and do a little bit of introspective, right? Uh,
Absolutely.
mhm.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
I'm talking about, the solo episodes. I don't do that many, but I did one that was memorable for me because it involved my reaction to a spiritual journey I had been on.
mhm,
And it had been a situation where it could have been the worst thing that ever happened to me. But because I wanted to, get to the bottom and overcome it, it ended up being a fantastic learning experience and
mhm,
something that I felt the lessons I learned from that. I said I had to share that and share that with the listeners, and
mhm.
I think it was a very powerful message.
Do you often hear back your episodes?
Do I listen to them?
Yeah,
Uh, well, right before I post them, I will listen to them to make sure that it is like there's no huge gaffes in it.
right.
You know, uh, and I will let some, minor things slip by because, I think it also helps when it feels a little natural and a little
Definitely.
like,
Hmm.
not super, super, super slick.
Right.
Uh,
But do you hear it and with a very kind of critical mind and thinking, okay, this could be better, that could be better, or do you just relax and hear it as you are like another listener of your own podcast?
I think a little bit of both.
Hmm.
Certainly when I'm listening to it on the playback, making sure that, that it's, good enough to put out there. But I'm also listening and reminding myself, oh yeah, that was a really interesting thing that person said, or
Hmm.
yeah, I got to remember to do that in my own life. It'd be very
Yeah.
helpful to me.
Yeah. How do you prepare the interviews? Do you have a script? Do you send the questions beforehand? What is the best way to prepare interview for you?
Well, I want to know who my guest is
Hmm.
beforehand, so I schedule a pre-call where
Okay.
it's like I call it my get to know you call. So we just sit and we talk about like what does the person do? What do they want to share? What's important to them? A lot of times, it'll be they have a new book out. I'll read the book and see
You'll
what I
read the
can get.
book.
Oh, I
Wow.
always if a guest has a book, I will read it,
Wow.
because, I wanna learn for one thing.
Right.
Secondly, I can write more intelligent questions for
Hmm.
them, and, what I do is before the podcast, I will write first of all, I have my intro to the podcast, all right? I
Hmm.
write it out, and that's usually, my own perspective on what the theme of the show is gonna be.
Right.
And then I'll introduce my guest, and I'll have a set of questions, prepared. And that's for me so that, it's like my safety net. I
Right.
don't want to get into a question, when the person finishes answering, and I'm like, blah, 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 blah,
Okay.
blah, 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 what do I
What
do? What
now?
do I do now? So I always have something that I could
Hmm.
ask. But very often, I'll let the conversation go in the direction it's going. Like in the person's answer to my question, it might lead to something that isn't the next question I have on my list. So we'll go there, and then we'll see where it goes.
Hmm.
So
How do you come back to the storyline though, because that happens to me as well. I'm interviewing someone, then I just follow some other line of thought, and then suddenly like, okay, I have we completely are off topic now. Like, how do you circle back to keep your interview on track?
Well, it depends on the guest. For instance, if the guest has a book and we're talking at the book, I might say, "Oh, and in your book, you said blah 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 blah," and gets
Hmm.
into the next question. Or I'll say, something else I've been thinking about, or something else that I think you mentioned,
Hmm.
and sort of, it's on the spot. So,
Yeah. And what kind of questions do you do in your preparation conversation, the get to know you conversation? What kind of questions do you do?
that one's it's a very general thing. Like, I may ask them where they live, 'cause, one of the things I run into sometimes is, the time zone difference.
Oh
And,
yeah.
you know, and I wanna make sure that, we're dealing with the same time, especially when scheduling the interview.
Hmm.
Uh, but, I'll ask them, like, maybe how they got started, what they're doing, why they like doing what they're doing, and
Hmm.
general questions like that. And sometimes, that what they do or the program they have may have a very unique name to it. So I'll say, "What does this mean?" We'll get into it. But those are very, uh, fairly brief conversations. So I just have a sense of who we're talking about. I can see,
Right.
what they look like, how they speak,
Hmm.
general things like that. That just gets me feeling a little bit more comfortable with them, so I don't feel like I'm talking to a total stranger.
Yeah. Totally. So it's just a normal, chilled conversation, like a coffee chat, just to get to know someone, right?
Pretty
And
much.
and you're just mentioning the time zones, which is really can be really hard, especially nowadays. We interview people over the internet, and we're always in different time zones. I use Calendly to schedule these interviews because it helps managing the different time zones. Do you use a tool for scheduling?
I use that as well. I use that
You
as well,
also
and I
use
I do
Calendly.
find it very helpful.
Right. What other tools do you use for in your process? Right. Like, how do you record it? How do you publish it? What's your stack?
Okay, well, right now I, record on Zoom, and I know people are saying, "Don't use Zoom, there are all these other things that come out." But one of the things is I have a beautiful background that I use
Mm,
for me. In fact, I can't tell you how many guests have commented on it. So
yeah.
so I don't wanna lose that, and I haven't yet found, the alternate that works best for me, so I'm fine with it. Uh,
Mm.
I also,
You have a green.
a
Sorry to
green
interrupt. You have
screen
a green screen,
a
right?
green
So
screen, right?
today we are not using that green screen because we didn't know if you could use that with Zencaster, right? So
Right,
that's the
I wasn't
limitation.
sure, and I didn't wanna come on with just having a green background.
Yeah.
So we're in what I call my Superman room, because I have
Mm.
these, cells of the Superman movie from the
Oh yeah. It's
1930s, so
a
it's
great background too.
it gives
Mhm.
me power, makes me feel
Yes.
powerful. So, you
Yeah.
know, so
So
we do
you.
that. And then
Mhm.
you're asking about my so then once it's recorded, I use a program called the Script,
Mhm.
where, it will take the podcast, and I edit it, basically a paper edit, which
Right.
makes the editing go faster, because that wasn't around when I first started, and
Mhm.
I would have to do it, take out,
Yeah.
cut and paste kind of things, to do that, electronically cut and paste
Right. So now
to
you
do it.
can actually read the words and edit using the
I can
transcript.
read
Is
the
that it?
words. I can read the words. I can, totally do it. They have a tool where you can take out all the ums, which
Okay.
is also very helpful.
Definitely.
And definitely. And, then I use Pod Squeeze. I will load that in. It gives me a really nice transcript,
Mhm.
except like I told you, it always spells my name wrong, so I'll have to work
Yes.
on that. I can edit it, so that works out
Mhm.
fine. Uh, Getting back to, my process, like I said, I got started on this network, through this woman I had met, and
Right.
that worked fine with me until about a year ago, when the network just wasn't working for me
Mhm.
anymore. I wasn't getting enough out of it.
Okay.
So I left that, and so I went to a new, podcast provider. I'm now using
But sprout.
Buzzsprout.
Mhm.
And, so one of the things that I never did, because when I was using the network, I just uploaded my show, that was all I did. I never had transcripts in there. I never had, chapter
Right.
breaks. And so what I love about Pod Squeeze is that does that and gives me those things. I can create them very, very easily where I didn't have it
Mhm.
before. So it was an extra thing to add, which I never had. If
Okay.
anybody looking for my podcast again, I never had that before.
Mhm.
Uh, and they're very tools. Like what I always did was post on social media. I'd post little clips about my podcast, or I'd post, it was coming, and or I
Mhm.
might just have like a photo of the guest, if it was a guest kind of thing. Uh, Having keywords created for me, it just makes it makes everything go a little faster. I mean, having
Right.
that, having the show notes. This combination of actually the newsletter feature.
Mhm.
I adapt that for my show notes because my show notes are always a little longer,
Okay.
and
Mhm.
uh, so I'm able to use that. It makes those processes which I did go faster for me,
Mhm.
which I help. And also coming up with the titles. I would come up with the titles. I don't always use the titles that get created, but it sparks me. It gives me
Mhm.
a jumping off
Ideas.
point. It
Yeah.
gives me an
Mhm.
ideas.
It's a
So
brainstorming partner. I was
it
interviewing someone here in the podcast, and he said, "Yeah, Pod Squeeze is brainstorming partner."
that's what, that's a great way to put it. I
Mhm.
didn't think of that. I wish I thought of that. But yes, it just helps everything that I do, and faster and better.
Yeah, I think it was David from School of Podcasting that said that. Yeah, so I can really see that you are a power user of Podsquiz, which is amazing. I always love to meet our users. You're mentioning the network, and I'm interested about that because I've never met anyone that was actually part of one. Can you just describe what is a podcasting network and like why would one like to be part of it?
Well, this is where the pros and the cons came in. What was nice is that I was with a group of uh, like-minded people. The whole idea of all the podcasts that were on the network are very heart-centered, uh,
Hmm.
very ins- inspiring, all about giving out, or helping people.
Right.
Kind of theme of the podcast in all kinds of areas.
Hmm.
And it was very nice to be part of a community. We would meet every couple of weeks and, have a Zoom call. We would just get
Okay.
together and talk. That was the nice part. What it made me realize it wasn't working for me was uh, the one thing that was promised that didn't get delivered was promotion.
Okay.
Uh, they did very little promotion in terms of both the group or any of the individual podcasts.
Hmm.
There were other things that happened. They created a agency where there were things to sell. Like you join the agency and you could sell
Okay.
different things,
Hmm.
and that really didn't work for me.
Hmm.
It wasn't the kind of thing I was interested in, and it was very more a hard sell thing where that's
Right.
not what I do. So it didn't make sense for me to be a part of that anymore.
Hmm.
And
So, would you recommend for someone that is starting out their podcast to join a network? And if so, what should they look for in a good network?
well, it's very individual. I'm not sure that it can depends, and again, it depends on the network.
Hmm.
Like I said, this network was helpful to me in the beginning because they did have some very, very useful and practical advice on how to put together a podcast.
Right. You learned a lot.
Things that
Hmm.
so that's how I learned how to how to interview, how to get guests, all
Hmm.
the basic things that were very helpful that I might not have been able to get otherwise. Or otherwise, I would have had to search harder to get
Right.
otherwise. So it was very
Hmm.
nice to have all of that in one place, and
Hmm.
also, you know, meeting some other like-minded people. A couple of those people ended up being guests on my
Hmm.
podcast. I was a guest on their podcast. Uh,
Yeah.
so there are some helpful, practical things of being
Yeah.
there. Every network is different, and I could only speak to the one I was in, so I can't speak
Right.
to the
Of course.
value that any other one
Yeah.
would.
No, but I can see that it brings some value, especially if someone is just starting out to learn more about podcasting, to get some motivation, and again, as well, to get some potential guests, right? So I totally understand the
All right.
benefit
And
of it.
and I guess there's also a bit of accountability there because,
Exactly.
if you say you're putting out a weekly podcast, there's
Hmm.
somebody saying, "Hey, where's your podcast?
Yeah,
Where is it? Why you're not putting it out?" So
totally.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's helpful.
I think a lot of people, I don't know the statistics now by heart, but I know that uh, people only release 3 or 4 episodes, and then most of them end up, giving up and stopping their podcast. So accountability is key for someone that is starting their new project. As a last question, Debbie, what would be your advice? You have 5 years of experience in the area, in the podcasting area. Let's say someone is just starting out their podcast. What would be your advice for them?
My main advice would be don't do it if you don't love it.
Mhm.
It is work. It takes time, especially when you're first starting out until you get a routine going. You're kind of, sort of working everything out. So if you don't love it, don't start. Because what will happen is, yes, you may have something you really want to get out there, so you'll
Mhm.
do one podcast, maybe two, and then
Definitely.
you'll fall off. So to keep it sustainable, you have to love it. I mean, I love what I do.
Mhm.
I love the opportunity to meet people. I love the opportunity to meet incredibly powerfully intelligent people.
Mhm.
It keeps my brain going. It keeps me, curious. I learn so much from it, so I hope my audience learns from it.
Mhm.
Uh, and that's really, really it. You've got to love what you do.
I think that's it. That's great advice. Um, so Debbie, tell us, where can we find you again? What's the name of your podcast, and one episode that people should start off? Like, what would be the one episode that if people are starting listening to your podcast, which episode should they pick?
Okay, well, the name of the podcast is Dream Power Radio, and it is available wherever podcasts are available. It's on. I don't even know how many places it's on. It's everywhere. I would say if you want to get inspired, I had an episode a couple of weeks ago that inspired me tremendously. It was a woman who created a not created, but she practices a type of yoga called awake yoga, which is very spiritual.
Mhm.
And I had her on because she wrote a book, which is also very powerful. But during the interview, while she was speaking, she had exuded such joy and such love and such spirit. I could actually literally feel it through the screen as I'm
That's
talking to
incredible.
her. And it just filled me with this
Mhm.
incredible love and joy. And people who have talked to me about it, I don't get a lot of feedback to the podcast, but this particular one, people have said, wow, this was really very powerful
Mhm.
podcast.
Do you remember which episode it was, or the title, or?
Well, her name, I the first thing when you go down my podcast, I have the person's name. Her name was
Mhm.
Swami Ananda,
Okay.
and
I will link it in the show notes together, also with the name of the your podcast, and wherever you want me to link so that people can find you. Debbie, thank you
sure.
so much for sharing your journey here with us, and yeah, it was a pleasure.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
This podcast is brought to you by PodSqueeze, an essential tool for podcasters that creates show notes, timestamps, clips, and more. Visit podsqueeze.com and use the code PODCASTER for 20% discount in the first 3 months. We release a new episode every Tuesday and Thursday. See you in the next episode of Lessons from a Podcaster.